Hello and welcome to the Saturday morning Q&A edition of the CFB Super Show. I am your host, Walter Waddell, aka Deuce85, a very dignified Walter Waddell, I'll have you know, rocking the rec specs. This is what happens when you're a contact wearer. You don't sleep a lot the last few days. You pull some all-nighters like you're back in, your younger years. And, when that happens, you just don't feel very good when you try to put those contacts on. It ends up burning. So I'm rocking the glasses today, doing the thing, really channeling my inner rec specs here. So that is what we're doing. This is the Q&A show. Give me a second here. I'm going to go ahead and post this link for all to see. All right. There we are. How is everybody doing? I hope you guys had a enjoyable slate yesterday. Got a little wacky with the EJ Smith getting like 4 touches. Thankfully, he scored a touchdown. Obviously, that hurt my feelings a little bit because I had some props there. Tylan Hines is clearly broken for Hawaii. That didn't matter. We still were profitable last night. Thank the Lord. Thursday was a rough one. I always like to be transparent and say, hey, we had this good slate. Let's talk about it. Hey, we had a bad slate. Let's also talk about it. Not a lot of people in the space do that. And not a lot of people in the space also are willing to take stands with those line in the sand plays. There's a lot of, this player did this player did this. They're good. They're options. But there's no real like, hey, I'm on this guy, win or lose. And I like to say that I pride myself on doing that. So we did have a good night last night. We have a ton of content out for you right now. The main slate breakdown is over on ftndaily.com. If you're not a member already, what are you doing? Get over there. Use my code DUB. Get yourself 10% off. Huge savings. There is the NFL package still under the early bird, which I believe does give you access to CFB. But you should just take it to the next step further. Sign up for the all sports included package. Totally NFL, NBA, MLB, college football. You'll be set for college basketball, which is going to be here before you know it. John Rothstein has a running timer there. We'll be doing both of those. Niche sports galore, racing, tennis, esports. Just everything. Sports betting, prize picks, underdog, season long, dynasty, DFS, everything you want, you got it. You want a recipe for my grandma's lasagna? I can get that for you. Just head over to the Discord. Let's talk about it. Speaking of which, I still stand by my comments yesterday on Twitter. A lot of back and forth by some in the space. Not taking a shot at anyone, just only speaking from what I know, which isn't a lot, but what I do know is that the Discord, the FTN Discord, is by far the best community in the space and by far on Discord and in DFS, sports betting, and season long. We just have a community that tilts together, celebrates together, licks our wounds together, and we really have a bunch of people who post news. We're constantly doing depth charts, starters in basketball. When there's late breaking news, we're posting that. We're processing it. We're digesting it together. We are avoiding late scratches. Last night, we got our first taste of the season nice and early with Jalen Daniels. He's starting. He's not starting. He's starting. He's not starting. I had that thought. I said, hey, be prepared. It seems like Daniels isn't going to play. They don't need him. This would be a fine spot to play Bean. They're going to win the game regardless. They need Daniels for next week against Illinois. Don't expect him to play even though he's warming up. And, gamemanship of these coaches making it seem like Daniel's going to play. He ends up not playing. He ends up being 21% owned on a 5-game slate. That's rough. That's rough. Not for us, of course. That was fine, but rough for those of you that rostered him despite that wacky news. All right, let's get into it. So the Q&A show is for you. You guys are going to lead it for the most part. I've got questions in Discord. I've got questions on Twitter from Slack. You guys are interacting with me there on the live chat. Pretty much just going to rehash what I've really talked about on Thursday with Jake, not to the full extent, of course, but rehashing the core. If any of my thought process has changed, there's really like one spot that I think is left. We've got a pretty good handle on lineups. one spot with one running back out of a group of 3 or 4 that we're really trying to get into. I'll kind of talk about that and work through my thoughts there. Also, finalize any last minute prize picks and prop betting stuff. And if you guys have questions, of course, just continue to drop those, ask those, do your thing. All right. Jamie. What's up, Jamie? It's good to see you, my man. You post plenty of value, brother. Plenty of value. Can Boise State muck this game up? No, not on the road. I don't know. Boise State's just going to be okay, I guess. Green's going to have his day, but today I don't feel like it's a very good spot for Boise, and I think the Huskies are they're going to be so hyped and so pumped that Penix is going to come out and throw 2 quick touchdowns back-to-back drives, and it's going to take the wind right out of their sails. Holani's not going to be able to run the football at all. They're going to have to abandon the run, and I just don't think Boise State has the weapons really to keep up. But don't worry, it's not as if like there's going to be some big blowout and Penix is going to have to get pulled early. Even if he has to sit later in the game, which I don't know if that'll actually happen. I doubt it. He's going to have like 300 yards and 3 touchdowns as a floor. And he's only 8'4", and if people are actually considering not rostering him in their main lineup, that's just better for us. Give him Reggie Bush's Heisman today. Hell yeah. Says Penix ceiling versus Milton ceiling. Like for legitimately, if Boise State can keep up and not like slow the game completely down, which they're going to have to try to do, Penix can throw for 400 yards in this offense. There was talk prior to the Cam Davis injury that we're going to run the football more. Dylan Johnson on the team now, we're going to have those little our running back passes that are PPR gold for us. But with Davis out, and people don't realize, even if Davis was going to play, there was still going to be a running back committee. They're going to have, plenty of guys getting touches, whether it was Johnson, Newton, Sam Adams, who's a youngster that I really like for the future. That was going to happen regardless. They're still going to throw the football. And if Boise State can keep this one interesting, there's 400-plus yards in Michael Penix's bag. And, Penix can really get it done in the red zone as well. Like, he can run a little bit, and he might call his own number there. So you don't want to, completely ignore the fact that he could throw for 4 touchdowns, 400 yards, and maybe punch 1 or 2 in from the red zone as well. I just feel like the Huskies are going to be balling out here. Rome Odunze versus. Wait, let me pull this back up. Egbuka asked Chase. Depends on your makeup. I think that Ohio State. The Ohio State situation is weird for me because obviously they're going to score points. I don't like the fact that they're going to be playing, probably both quarterbacks at points. I love Egbuka because he has that touchdown equity for a much cheaper price than Marvin Harrison. So he fits what you'd like to do there in terms of a high floor. But if you're running Penix, you certainly want to have one of his targets at least. There's people asking about, triple stacking. I don't think that's necessary. You want to have one of McMillan or Rome, I think, at that point. So if you're running, our guy Penix, then I think you choose Rome there. I'm getting a lot of questions on DMs about Denzel Boston, people wanting to roll him in Maine. I know I'm just crazy enough to do that, but I tried to make it clear in the article and just in conversation with people that I want him to be a guy that you guys have in your scopes. Maybe you throw him in an alt for now, and you kind of just prepare yourself for rostering him. He's not main team viable yet. There's about 4, maybe 5 guys on the team capable of putting up stats as receivers. Boston's just been tearing it up. I do think he eventually, quickly, not even eventually, but quickly becomes the WR3 here, even ahead of Bernard. And he will have games where he catches a touchdown or pops for 100 yards. I don't think it's necessary to play him right now. But there's going to be a couple of good plays that kind of puts him on others' radars, and there will be a time where I tell you, yes, we're going to go ahead and roster him. I know we had the Nick Nash call last week and really pride ourselves on trying to find those line in the sand plays, but Boston is not that for me right now, even though I do love him. The line in the sand play for me, of course, is going to be a player from Tennessee, which we're going to talk about here in a second. So that's where I'm at with the line in the sand receiver play for Boston. Favorite receiver for Huskies is going to be Rome. If you can get there, if you need a few hundred discount, it's fine to go to Jalen McMillan. I do feel like, both of them went for 1,000 yards last year. I do feel like that won't happen this season just because of the emergence that will happen of some of the other options in the receiver room. I still think Rome is the one that will cruise for 1,000 yards. I think McMillan is the one that will probably hurt a little bit, but he's going to have games where he's, 120 yards, 2 touchdowns. So if you need that savings at 6'9" from the 7'3", I know it's only 400, but sometimes that 400 makes all the difference. I certainly don't mind it, but at this point, Rome is the guy that I'm leaning on for my main team and my favorite pairing partner for the Washington Huskies quarterback and future Heisman winner, if Alex is to believe there. Let's pull up a couple more here. Lucas from the 80s movie. I don't know if that's a good thing or not, but I'm good with it. Baxter, Sam's asked, Baxter, oh yes, we need to talk about him. Trayvon Randolph or Donovan Edwards, Ty James. Seeing the Ty James name come up a lot. Ty James, obviously, completely just a sicko for Mercer. Had games of 351 receiving yards. You don't see that very often. 126, 120, 138, 192, just an absolute monster. Ole Miss defense, it's been a beatable unit. I don't want to get burned. We played, the kid Isaiah Wooden the other night. He had a 52-yard reception, but didn't quite do what we wanted. It's a risk. Those high volume, high targeted guys that play for the big underdog teams, theoretically, game script wise, yes, they're going to get peppered with targets. And while that works at the professional level, because all these guys are more on an even footing, at the collegiate level, it makes a big difference. And those SEC level athletes can make life a little bit difficult there for Ty James. So I see he's 3.8. I know people are talking about him. I know he might garner some ownership, but he's kind of like Denzel Boston for me, more of a GPP play. So I would be leaning towards Baxter and Randolph. With that being said, I love Donovan Edwards. Let's get into that because that's really been the hot button issue. That's what we've been talking about in the FTN CFB DFS Discord for about an hour and a half, all morning really. For the running back room, what we're going to do with our main lineups, who we're going to run with. I think at this point, it's well established that we are going to, as a group, FTN, myself here, with Quinshon Judkins being our RB1. It doesn't appear that, the rest of the industry feels the same, and that's something that we love. I feel running backs at the collegiate levels in DFS are so important. We see them catching passes, a high amount of volume there. It's a little bit easier to predict production for the running backs. There's far less variance, although EJ Smith last night, when you got a coach that's being very, very odd. But I think that our specialty over the last couple of seasons that we've been with FTN is finding these high volume, high upside, high floor running backs that aren't really being rostered by the rest of the industry. And I'm totally comfortable and okay with that. I think most of you that have been with me for any length of time are comfortable with that as well. So Judkins at 6'6", probably under 20% ownership. I am all about it. The fact of the matter is super efficient last year, had to share the rock with Zach Evans. Zach Evans is not there anymore. I'm not worried about Ulysses Bentley coming in and taking a significant amount of work from him. Bentley could pilfer a touchdown or two, and that will be something that tilts us for sure. But when you look at Judkins, man, going to be getting the bulk of the work here in this backfield, 20-plus carries. I don't care if it turns into a blowout. That's the big thing with all these running backs. We'll get into Michigan guys in a minute. Everybody worried like, hey, they're not going to play the fourth quarter. They're only going to play half a third quarter. If it becomes a blowout that big and they're benching their starters, then theoretically the reason it's a blowout is because of those starters, right? And if Judkins gets pulled, it's probably because he rushed for 150 yards at halftime and scored a couple of times. Yes, we want him to play more. We don't want to stop there. We want 200 yards. Give it to me like he did against Texas A&M on 34 carries. Remember that 30-point game that he had? But we're not also very upset if he gets that number at halftime. So Judkins is just a beast. I expect him to be a total bell cow. So we're all in agreement here in the FTN community that Judkins is our RB1. Then it veers off and it gets a little messy after that because there's a group of running backs that are all similarly priced that I think all fit in well into type of lineup that we're trying to build for main / primary lineup. And again, I explain this as not cash and GBP, but whatever that lineup is that has the significant amount of action. your high dollar GPPs, your single entry stuff, your cash, yes, but whatever that lineup is for you that you're really riding the most money on, this is what we're talking about. With Michigan, I think, it took me after the Thursday show with Jake, I really thought about it with the Blake Corum versus Donovan Edwards versus CJ Stokes. I think, although CJ Stokes is another one of those cheap running backs that can be used, I think it's a mistake to use him in your main build. Yes, he'll get extra work probably in the second half, but again, Corum and Edwards have shown they can compete at a high level with less playing time, less snaps by halftime, having 100+ yards, multiple touchdowns in. However, I really worked it out this way with Blake Corum. 6.9 is a great price for him. The injuries have kind of piled up for him in the last couple of seasons. Health, a big issue. You do not need to overextend him against ECU. I could see him playing less than a half and really kind of just letting him get, score once, get his game legs back and be prepared for the better opponents on their schedule. That's what I think is going to happen. With Donovan Edwards, I think he sees more work. He's super explosive. He's going to be doing some stuff like lining up in the slot when Corum's a running back. He's also going to be getting, obviously, carries himself. There's just a lot of different ways that Edwards can perform and produce for us today. So I am now officially taking Edwards over Corum in this group. The second player that we have to consider for our next running back spot is going to be Caleb Johnson for Iowa. And I'm getting a little bit of pushback from people, which I like. You got to keep me honest for the things I say. I can't just say something, and if it's bothering you or it doesn't make sense, I would implore you to continue to ask questions. But Caleb Johnson for Iowa, sitting there at 5'7", somebody who last year rushed for over 700 yards, despite the fact that the Iowa passing offense was completely non-existent. Now, I stick by what I said on Thursday when I mentioned that Cade McNamara is obviously an improvement over what they had with Spencer Petras and the other, noodle arm guys that they had out there. The receiving room is upgraded. They do have some really strong tight ends with Eric All coming over as well. Luke Lachey, they're going to be able to move the chains here, but it doesn't mean that Cade McNamara is coming in to be Michael Vick. He's not in there making 90-yard throws. He's not scrambling for 17-yard chunk plays. He's simply managing the game, which I know is a taboo word in DFS, but we're not using Cade McNamara. We're using Caleb Johnson. Remember that. He's simply moving and managing the game, throwing 4 yards, throwing 7 yards. Maybe he completes one for 12. It's enough to keep that defense from stacking up the line, keeping them honest, and allowing Caleb Johnson to find some holes without, being collapsed and converged upon. If Caleb Johnson could rush for 780 yards last year with the non-existent passing game, then what do you think he's going to do with an actual, you can, if you want to call it mediocre, there's a lot of Cade McNamara hate this morning. I'm seeing it. Mediocre players such as Cade McNamara, who, again, doesn't have to be Mike Vick, doesn't have to be Tanner Mordecai, doesn't have to be Joe Montana. He just has to be able to complete passes ranging from 3 to 12 yards. If he can do that, Caleb Johnson is going to be able to find a ton of holes. He's going to be able to rack up yardage. His prop of 86.5 rushing yards today is not safe. He will rush for 100+ yards, and he will break 1,000 yards this year. I am extremely confident in that Caleb Johnson in that regard. So he's in that grouping for us. He's facing that Utah State defense that last year gave up over 200 yards per game on the ground. They made no improvements, really no upgrades on that level. They might hold guys to 175, 180 rushing yards, perhaps, maybe not the full 200, but this is a great matchup for him. So Caleb Johnson also in that group. I know some more questions coming through. We're going to get to him here. Then we move over to the Texas running backs, where I'm seeing Jonathan Brooks being pushed a lot, but it did just come out, within an hour that CJ Baxter going to get the first crack there as the starter. Exciting, high-level freshman, had his pick of wherever he wanted to go. He's $200 more than Brooks at 5'5". Now, I believe Texas will end up using 4, maybe 5 running backs as this one gets out of hand. But again, Baxter's going to have that opportunity to get his feet wet. He's going to possibly rush for 100+ yards, 2 touchdowns by halftime. He's a great play. He's in that same price bucket, 5'5", along with Edwards, who's a little bit more at 6'2", and Caleb Johnson, who's a little bit more at 5'7". Lastly, there's one more running back that we have in that group, and I think we do want to take 2 of those 4 to go ahead with Judkins, the way that we want to build here. We move over to TCU against Colorado. Colorado's rush defense, terrible. Their secondary, terrible. Their defense overall, awful last year. Deion Sanders comes to town. They're going to have a secondary that gambles and wants to make plays, but their front is not going to be that great. And I think they're still going to get trounced when it comes to the running game. TCU has two that they can really rely on. DeMarcado's gone. Obviously, Kendre Miller's gone. Imani Bailey, who has been in a running back by committee for most of his career and has produced when he was at Louisiana, not so much last year. And then Alabama transfer Trey Sanders, who's very cheap at 3.9, but he's not the one that I'm considering for my main, although maybe I should. But Imani Bailey at 5.4, I think this is an opportunity for him to get a lot of carries, double digits, 15 plus touches, perhaps. Again, fits into that bucket of 5.4K, and he's certainly a guy capable of being a main. But you want to play it like this. If you're on Chandler Morris, like a lot of the industry is, one of the higher-owned quarterbacks of the day, and you can play a TCU running back with a quarterback. We did it all the time with Hacksaw last year and Kendre Miller. Totally fine. So you can do that with Bailey and Morris. It's not a primary reason to fade Bailey, but if you're looking for a way to kind of whittle down those 4 to 2, perhaps that's, you hope that Morris gets rushing touchdowns, throws the ball a lot. So Bailey's in that group as well. For me, he's probably at the bottom. Doesn't mean he's not a good play. I just value Edwards, Johnson, and Baxter a little bit more. With that being said, I think Caleb Johnson is firmly in play. I'm married to the play, if you will, at this point. I think he's going to be really, really good. I have his prop in there and PrizePicks, the DK Sports book, and I think I'm riding with him. So it really becomes Donovan Edwards versus CJ Baxter. And it's still a decision that I'm deciding upon with Donovan Edwards. I'll tell you, he has proven he can produce at a high level and score 30 plus fantasy points in blowout games. And then you have the number one running back recruit. We haven't got a chance to see him at this level just yet, but he has all the upside in the world, but there's no resume yet to back it up. However, he's facing a really weak opponent that he should be able to run all over on. So really for me, it's probably Baxter versus Edwards, and I'll be making that decision all the way up until lock. As of now, it's Edwards for me, but I'm going back and forth with that being said. So that's my running back thing. It's not a 4 running back slate. I want to make that clear. People have been asking me. There's some new players to college football DFS this year in the FTN Discord, which I'm happy about. Welcome. And asking me, hey, do we always play a quarterback in the super flex? Now, 98% of the industry or the niche sports content creators around the industry will say yes. But there's one in particular that will tell you no. And you're looking at them. I'm probably the only one that truly believes you can get away without playing a quarterback in the super flex on certain types of slates. This is not the slate to do it, although looking at these running backs, plays, we could certainly do that. But the last 2 seasons we've cashed. I'd have to go back and look at it, but we've had some real nice success. Not just me, but Jake and others have had success running a running back in that super flex. I will never do a wide receiver in that super flex, but here's the thing about it. You have these 9K quarterbacks. They had a bad game, get picked off. Maybe they don't rush for any yardage. You have the 8K running back who comes in, scores twice, catches 5 passes, breaks 120 yards. Like, there's just so many more paths to viability from that, especially if it's a bell cow running back, that I think people read. So I wanted to throw that out there because I had been asked that 3 times this morning alone. All right, let's get back into the questions. Would you take BC versus Northern Illinois under 50.5? Yes, I would. Although I do love Rudolph returning. Rocky Lombardi is decent. Orion O'Keefe is solid. Transfer from UCF, but I do think that under's in play. Thoughts on Trey Harris with all the Ole Miss wide receiver tight end injuries? Man, Ole Miss, they just can't seem to get healthy. I'm a little, as I mentioned it briefly on Thursday, that I love what Ole Miss has done and what they continue to do in the portal when it comes to pass catchers. But the way that Jalen Robinson and a few others just didn't work out for them, it certainly makes me a little bit concerned. Trey Harris is potentially a slate breaker in the right situation. I know Zachary Franklin is in town now. Hasn't been practicing. That's not good. My man from Memphis, the QB converted to tight end, Caden Prescorn, who has done us very well. Foot surgery. So, he's not going to be playing for the first 3, 4, 5 games of the season. That's tough. Michael Trigg, who is, ailing himself. He's going to be out. I know it's disciplinary, but I did see that there was some talk about some other stuff for him. But there's just, a lot of guys out. And that just, to me, further solidifies Judkins, because they're going to have to get out of there without any more injuries, right? Just a game against Mercer. Like, let's do it in front of the crowd. Let's win this game and get out of there. Just hand the ball off to Quinshon, please. 35 times. I'll take it. You'll take it. We love it. Just, it makes so much sense. But yeah, Trey Harris is nice. 6-1. It's just an okay price for me. Jordan Watkins there at 4-9, kind of intriguing. You've got, Wade sitting there at 3-6, Dayton Wade. So I certainly don't hate it, depending on how many lineups you're planning to run. But I'm not starting with any Ole Miss wide receivers, that's for sure. Rudolph, Johnson, or Edwards, Boston. Getting a lot of the Johnson versus Edwards. Just went over that with the RB section of the show. I would go with the first one there, even though I love Donovan Edwards. Denzel Boston, I'm assuming, Jamie, you're talking about your primary lineup. Again, I love Denzel Boston. I want you guys to be aware of who he is, that he's on breakout watch. But the first week of the season, it's tough to really go there if it's not a GP lineup. I think you're doing yourself a bit of a disservice, because there are so many viable guys with a proven resume who are underpriced right now. And one being Trayvon Rudolph, who is obviously coming back from a serious injury that cost him all of last year. But we know just how good he was in 2021 and what kind of relationship he has with Rocky Lombardi, sitting there at 4-6 against BC. I think you got to find that 400 to go from Boston to him. If Boston was min price at 3K, I think the conversation would be a lot different, and I would be really kind of harping on it, because at that point he only really needs to catch one, right? 1-2 passes, maybe he gets a score, maybe he breaks 50 yards. But at 4-2, he's got to do a little bit more. You also have Jatavian Sanders, our man from Texas, the tight end that we were super high on last year, broken price under 4K. So you have him for value as well. But yes, I would be on the Johnson Rudolph side there for sure. That's the way I would go. Brett asks, any good FanDuel value plays? FanDuel gets not enough love, as they seemingly give up on their product at times, and then they bounce back and make some pretty decent slates. I did have a few FanDuel plays in this weekend's write-up, but let's see what we can pull out of here on FanDuel, because FanDuel needs love too. They need your love as well. Let's see. Squirrel White, who that's what I'm moving towards the Tennessee receiver talk now, for those that are anxiously awaiting that. I love, obviously, Ramel Keaton at his price on DK, but Squirrel White on FanDuel sits there at 6.5, where he does have the OR tag with Dante Thornton, the Oregon transfer, but at 6.5, that's a pretty cheap price on FanDuel. So I definitely have interest there. Andrew Anthony at 5.7 from Oklahoma transfer. I have some interest there. Austin Stogner, tight end at 4K. You could do worse with somebody like that. So those are a couple of cheaper looks that you can certainly consider. I would try to live in that 8K range on FanDuel today if you can. A guy like Juice Wells at 8.7, who I like a lot. Ramel Keaton's up there over 8K, who I obviously am super high on. So those are a couple of the cheapies, assuming you needed a wide receiver. If you needed a running back value, Tawai Walker from Oklahoma, 4.7, sub 4K on DraftKings. He's playable. Trey Sanders is 5.5 on FanDuel. He's also pretty solid. If you wanted to take a Texas A&M running back for maybe a GPP lineup, Ruben Owens is only 4.5. That's somebody to consider. But those are a couple of the cheapies that you can really look at. All right, now we need to talk about Tennessee wide receivers, and we have arrived to the line in the sand. I need to come up with some kind of gimmick, right? Like this, we're getting to that point where we've got to keep you entertained. So I got to come up with like some sort of sandbox, thing, and then like literally take a stick and draw a line in the sand, and then be like, have Jake jump in the camera and be like, boop, 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 time for the line in the sand play. Brought to you by Little Caesars Pizza. So this is it. the Tennessee wide receiver room, it's, Jalen Hyatt's gone, Seti Tillman gone off to the professional level. You have some really nice options still. Obviously, Hendon Hooker's not there. The running back room is the same as it's been last year with Jalen Wright and Jabari Small, so they have that continuity there. Joe Milton and his Uncle Rico-like passing ability and his arm that can literally throw a football over them mountains. Going to be able to operate really well in this offense. And there is just a receiver room with Brew McCoy, Squirrel White, and my personal favorite, brand favorite, if you will, Ramel Keaton in the mix there, as well as Oregon transfer Dante Thornton, who comes over. There's really like 4 good options here that are all going to perform quite well, I think, on a week-to-week basis. Now, Squirrel White is the one who, because of what he did in the bowl game, I mean, he had a really nice bowl game performance. A lot of people are heavy on Squirrel White, but he's more expensive than the other options on Tennessee, on DraftKings speaking here, sitting there at 5.5, which is a little bit too much for me, especially considering he has an OR tag. Now, I've seen people start to pull back a little bit as they realize the depth chart has him with an OR tag and probably splitting snaps with Dante Thornton. So I don't think we're going to see quite as much ownership on Squirrel White as we were like 4 days ago. Brew McCoy sits there at 4.8, more of who I would imagine is going to take if anyone's going to filter into like the Seti Tillman pre-injury role, like to me, that's Brew McCoy. Sitting there at 4.8, that's obviously a broken price. I've gotten a bunch of questions about, can we roll, 3 Tennessee players in a lineup? If you're going with Milton, you want to stack. That is an instance where, yes, the stack makes sense. I know in football and the professional level, correlation is huge. Stacking is huge. You can get away without doing as much of that in the college level because of all the craziness that happens there. There's a little more variance, and sometimes a receiver can go completely insane and break a slate, but the quarterback can be, kind of average, or vice versa. The quarterback has a massive game, but none of his receivers break value. So this is an instance, though, against a lowly Virginia team where I do think Milton's going to get off to a hot start, and he is going to throw a touchdown to various receivers to get them all involved. And Brew McCoy has multiple touchdown upside, 4.8, 100+ yard upside as well. It's too cheap for him, definitely. Now, my original thought was I'm going to get leverage off of Squirrel White, but now that I see ownership and people kind of not souring, but backing off to a degree and going full Brew McCoy, it still offers me leverage, just not up against the same player that I thought it was going to be. It's up against Brew instead of Squirrel. But of course, Ramel Keaton sitting there at a very cheap 4.1K. You see, usually it's a guy who, is a big broken price on FanDuel to DraftKings. We've been seeing a couple of, hey, this guy's really cheap. Jonathan Brooks is, 5.3 compared to 10K on FanDuel. But Keaton being, 8K plus on FanDuel, only 4.1K on DraftKings, and not really getting all that much hype or that much attention. Really, I wouldn't say surprise me, but Keaton deserves a lot more respect than he's been getting. And you look at what the Tennessee receivers bring to the table. The one that I think has the best opportunity to become the Jalen Hyatt WR1 alpha of this room is Ramel Keaton. Now, I'm extremely biased. I am a huge fan of his. I look at the numbers and I think that he just has the great opportunity. Look at last year after Jalen Hyatt and after Seti Tillman. Of course, Tillman missed, all but 5 games, 6 games. 1,200 yards for Jalen Hyatt. Brew McCoy almost 700. Then you had Ramel Keaton with 562. Then you had Squirrel White 481. Then you had Princeton Fant 241. So almost 600 yards is basically the WR4, tweener WR5. Now, obviously, a lot of that came after Tillman got hurt, but this is what life's going to be like. You don't have those 2 juggernauts. You have a standalone receiver not having to share. He's going to start. He's going to play a ton of snaps, and he's only 4.1. If you're looking for and I don't want to be too tacky with my, my posh play of the day in college basketball, my line in the sand play. Like I don't know. I like my gimmicks. I'm from the 90s and we got props and gimmicks, and that's just, I don't know. That's my thing. But if you're looking for the Nick Nash call of the day here, it's Ramel Keaton, because I expect fairly low rostership, under 15 to 20% in most formats. He won't be 5% like Nick Nash was. I don't think we'll get a gift like that again for a while. That was a pretty nice feeling, but you don't get those quite as often as you'd like. But I definitely think he'll be on the lower side, certainly half the ownership of Brew McCoy. And there's a really good opportunity and possibility of him, getting 100+ receiving yards and possibly scoring multiple touchdowns. And I think 75-1 is his floor today at 4-1. And he's absolutely going to obliterate. And there is a foreseeable way for everyone on this team to eat today and pan out where you just won't be wrong. And then I guess the stat comes into play. But Ramel Keaton is a core lock for me. My WR1, I think the opportunity is there, and he's cruising for 1,000+ receiving yards. So Ramel Keaton, I would love to be able to run it back mid next week and have my man Quan, one of our content media producers, be able to dial up a clip for me where I mention Ramel Keaton's name, and then we have a video of him, catching a touchdown. So I'm really looking forward to this Tennessee game. Ramel Keaton, core lock, got to get him in, got to play him. If you feel bad about fading Brew McCoy, I understand. Play them both, and then go get Joe Milton. Just make that happen. Obviously, Judkins is our other core at the quarterback spot, Michael Penix. So the core remains the same for me as it did on Thursday. I am still very bullish on all three of those players. And construction wise, I want one wide receiver from the Huskies. I want one running back from that Michigan group. I think I'm really kind of dialing in there, which is going to be Edwards. And then I'm locking in a guy like Caleb Johnson, who I think is going to absolutely eat. Now, the only other spot really is that third wide receiver spot where you've got Trayvon Rudolph, who, like I said, was a monster, almost 1,000 yards a couple of years ago, has that rapport with Rocky Lombardi. You have other cheapies on the slate that people have been asking about that you can possibly sub in and use instead. You have Jatavian Sanders as a sub 4K tight end that you can possibly use as well if you need further salary relief. There are some options here, but Rudolph is one that I'm really liking. And if you want the sneak for a GPP, then yes, that's where you can get Denzel Boston. That's where you can pop him in there. All right. Who is a super flex quarterback if Penix is quarterback? So time, I'm kind of a stickler for like starting times, right? So I want you to make sure that you don't, because God, if something were to happen, injury happen, a near late scratch a few minutes before the slate, you want to have some flexibility. So right now, to me, you're plugging Milton in the quarterback slot, or you're plugging Chandler Morris in the quarterback, or you're going up and you're getting a guy like Bo Nix. One of those three, and then Penix is going into your super flex, and that's just because of a start time thing. But I think your second quarterback, if you will, is going to be one of those three between Morris, Milton, and Nix. And there are other good options. Tanner Mordecai for Wisconsin's an intriguing GPP look. Dylan Gabriel's always a high floor type of play. Those are the group I'm really kind of honing in on. You have Devin Leary if you want to take a shot there with the Kentucky stack. They're going to be a lot of fun. But that's really what you're looking at. And Morris is going to be extremely, extremely high owned just because of the fact that he's 6'9", and we do need a little bit of extra salary relief. I typically like to go cheap at wide receiver when possible, which we're doing with Keaton, Rudolph, Sanders, that group. But Morris just gives you a few extra, $900,000 at that 6'9" price that you can use to beef up, or be able to go up and get Rome Odunze at 7'3" and really, have that higher end play as your third wide receiver, and they're not playing three cheapies. So let's talk a little bit about what we think from what I've seen and gathered to try to get a pulse on expected ownership, right? We'll do top three at the position. I think right now, to me, it looks like obvious answer, Chandler Morris being one of the highest owned quarterbacks, followed by Michael Penix and Joe Milton. I think those three are really what people, when you're going up against in double ups, head to heads, and single entry, you're going to see a lot of lineups with two of those three quarterbacks. Then Bo Nix drops, in after those guys maybe. And I think you see some Dylan Gabriel, maybe a little bit of Tanner Mordecai. But those are really your three super chalk lock quarterbacks that you're going to want to use two of in your primary lineup, not just because everybody else is, but because they're actually good. At running back, it's a little bit more difficult. I think there's going to be a lot of running backs that are like 15 to 25%. I think they're all going to be kind of, crowded on top of each other. From what I've seen, Judkins isn't the most talked about, so I think he falls down the list a little bit, which I like. I do think that a guy like Bucky Irving will end up being like a top 3 or 4 highest owned guy at the position, which might surprise some people, but he's only 6'1". If you can't get to Bo Nix at 10K plus, this gives you a way to do so. He's got nice touchdown equity. He catches passes. He is a formidable option there at that 6'1" price point. I didn't really talk about him, but he's a guy that you can definitely consider. With the news of CJ Baxter, I originally feel like a Texas running back will be super highly owned because, again, I don't know that people are really going to the passing game of Texas, but they want some exposure there with the amount of points they're expected to score. So I could see Baxter being one of those top 3 or 4 owned running backs as well. And then I have to figure, from what I've seen, Imani Bailey, the amount of questions I'm getting about Bailey, the amount of talk, I don't think people are afraid to use him with Morris at this point because of last year with Kendre Miller and Hacksaw, obviously different players, but similar system. So I think that we see a sizable chunk of ownership on Imani Bailey as well. And then I'm curious to see where a guy like Braylon Allen comes into play, because this Wisconsin offense is going to be more pass-oriented at times. Braylon Allen is going to share carries with Chez Mellusi, so I'm curious to see, because he is so cheap. I'm wondering if people are just going to plug and play him in and call it a day. And then wide receiver, obviously Brew McCoy. We know he's going to be one of the higher owned options. I think Ryan O'Keefe will be a top 3 high owned player on this slate, especially at the wide receiver position. And then I'm thinking that Ohio State, not Marvin Harrison because of his price, but probably Egbuka for the same reason I've been talking about him on Thursday. 7.4, significant discount, touchdown equity through the roof, a really solid way to get exposure to Ohio State, and one of the safer wide receivers on the slate by far. So I think Brew McCoy, Ryan O'Keefe, and Emeka Egbuka end up being your 3 highest owned receivers there. So do what you will with that information as you're building. Lou Testa asks, or he says, over 45.5 receiving yards on FanDuel. Yes, I have, God, what is it on PrizePicks now? I think it's like 40, it's either 48 or 47.5. So I have the over there, obviously like that on FanDuel. It was 51.5 on DK, so we had a worse number there, but I still like that as well. 47.5 on PrizePicks. I am hugely on the Ramel Keaton over. So yes, I am not backing down from that one. Bailey or Brooks, getting that in a myriad of places. I would probably say Imani Bailey is who you want to take over Brooks there, but I would encourage you to consider Caleb Johnson. I think he's a very solid option. I want to talk about some prize picks here while we wrap this up. Jake threw out a couple of extra in the Discord this morning. He likes the Milton over 2.5 passing touchdowns, solid look. And then Chimere DK over 3.5 receptions. He's a believer in that Wisconsin offense with Tanner Mordecai. They're going to throw the ball a lot more, so I like that one as well. My prize picks that I'm looking at, obviously the Keaton play, which we just talked about. I'm also super heavy on a play later in the day on the night slate. I think it's on the FanDuel main, but Antoine Juice Wells over 57.5 receiving yards. The battle of the Carolinas, South Carolina versus North Carolina. That's going to be a fun game. There's going to be a lot of points scored. The North Carolina secondary is going to be even worse than last year, if you can believe it. Their top 2 corners are gone, hit the transfer portal. Their top linebacker in terms of sacks, gone. I mean, their defense is going to somehow be worse. So Spencer Rattler should be able to carve them up. We already know North Carolina is going to score points. South Carolina's defense is not that great either, although it's better than North Carolina's. And Juice Wells should be looking at 100+ yards. So I like the over 57.5 Juice Wells. And then there's a fun one here, sticking in that same game, passing yards combo. This is where they've got, 2 quarterbacks in the same game that you can hit a, over under on. Drake May plus Spencer Rattler. They have it at 521.5 pass yards combination. That might seem like a ton, especially when you look at the board, and most of the other pairings are like 487, 455. But again, Drake May is going to throw for 280 plus yards. Spencer Rattler is going to throw for 300 plus yards. It seems like 600 is the minimum amount of passing yardage from the two quarterbacks there. So I like that little gimmicky overpass yards combination of 50 or 521.5, something that I'm highly considering, and we'll have it in the tracker here before that game starts. Also like Juice Wells over 4.5 receptions, which kind of takes me into the night slate, which the article will be going up for that. Just real quick, for those of you who haven't made the jump to FTN yet, the UTSA Roadrunners are on that slate. It's a very flush slate with a lot of talent. Frank Harris, Josh Cephas, LaDamian Webb. That's a freebie. That's going to be the core that we run on the night slate, but there's a ton of other targets there. Matthew Golden, Anaya Smith, Dre McCray, who transferred over from Austin Peay to Texas Tech. A lot of fun, different options that you can use there for the night slate. And the type of coverage that we're giving you at FTN includes not only the main slate breakdown, but also that night slate breakdown in a written content, and then Discord for the late night slate. And then every week, 2 shows guaranteed, and a slate breakdown for every single slate, which means Sunday's 3-gamer will have a top play style piece. And then on Monday Showdown, we will have the same. Lots of content for you. Get over to FTN. There are 3-day passes available that you can purchase as well to test out the site and see. If NFL's coming up, you do not want to miss it. All right, let's just go through here, check the final stuff, make sure there's nothing crazy here. All right. Jay Craig asks, would you drop from Rudolph, so to somebody like a Jatavian Sanders, to upgrade McMillan to Rome? That one I think is like you're tinkering at that point. I know the need to tinker is strong with me as well. That's more of a personal preference there. I don't know that the McMillan to Rome, upgrade is necessary to drop from Rudolph. I think you're probably good there, but if you want to roll a secondary lineup, for sure, but it's not something I think you need to really worry about or do. Dumi asked, wide receiver and flex better or 3 running backs? Don't play much college football. I would say running backs. Again, running backs are a very important piece in college football. They are way too valuable not to max out. Sometimes the slates have a lot of PPR gold where you'll want that extra wide receiver because teams maybe treat short passes like their running game. But for the most part, you definitely want to be running the 3 running backs and sometimes even a 4th. By the way, the almost sounds like a law firm. The Judkins and Johnson law firm is going to be going ham today. So that is where I'm at there. A lot of Baxter questions. We've pretty much already answered those. Favorite receiver under 4,900. Straight up would be Brew McCoy, but depending on your roster makeup, like Trayvon Rudolph at 4.6 is probably my favorite. That's another one I haven't really spent any time tinkering. Like Rudolph, I could go to Brew there if I wanted, but since I have Ramel Keaton, I would feel inclined to have to go find the money for Milton, and it would throw my entire lineup off. So depending on your construction and if you have Ramel Keaton or not, Brew McCoy is the answer there. But depending on your construction, if you do have Ramel Keaton, I think Trayvon Rudolph is your play there. Kind of zoned in and all good there. Do you like Bucky Irving or is he too risky? No, I don't think he's too risky. Even with Whittington taking work and a likely blowout, Bo Nix scoring rushing touchdowns, 6-1 makes him pretty safe. And I actually think he's going to be probably higher owned than we initially expected. So don't be surprised if you see quite a few Bucky Irving lineups out there. If you're trying to get different, that's probably not the way to do it. News-wise, Cade McNamara set to play. We kind of figured that. It's been dealing with a quad injury. Again, Cade McNamara doesn't need to be some sort of Joe Montana-like quarterback out there to open up the running game. He just needs to be adequate, which the bar was set so low. I don't think he'll have a problem doing that. More Ty James love. Lots of South Carolina, North Carolina trash talk. All right. That just about does it then. Let me pull up bets here and give you guys a couple props to see what the numbers are updated to. Random says O'Keefe or Rudolph. I mean, if you have the salary, if salary is like, not an issue, then O'Keefe is certainly your play at 6-1. Boston College, as porous as their team is and was, they did what they said they were going to do, and that was pepper Zay Flowers with targets and get the ball into his hands as much as possible. O'Keefe isn't the same type of receiver as Zay Flowers, but he is versatile, and he can definitely do a myriad of things, back up yardage, statistics, and fantasy points. So Ryan O'Keefe is definitely a guy. And he's another one that I think is going to be maybe a little bit higher owned than we initially expected, just based off of pricing here. But he's good. I wouldn't, if you don't have him, I wouldn't blow up your lineup to now try and get him in. But he's certainly a good look in all formats. All right, bets wise, I have three bets that I'm really, really in on. One is a spread, Tulane versus South Alabama. I like the -6.5 there for Tulane. No Ty J. Spears. I know that's tough. That's scary. Who did everything for them. Another brand favorite. But, Pratt's going to do some things, man. Coming into it and not having Spears around is going to force Michael Pratt to really, hone in and make, the best possible decision every time. Before, he could just hand it off or throw a little 2-yard dump pass to Ty J and let him do all the work. Now I think we're going to see Pratt really become even better of a dual threat, which he was great already. I mean, he rushed for almost 500 yards, 10 touchdowns on the ground, threw for over 3,027 touchdowns, only 5 interceptions. So Pratt is a very good quarterback. The game against South Alabama should be close for most throughout, but I think they end up winning by like 10-14. And I like that -6.5 number. So that is bet number one that I'm on. Tulane -6.5 just feels way too comfy there for me, and I'm gonna run it. The next one is a total UTSA versus Houston. Houston, they don't have Clayton Tune, they don't have Tank Dell, but they're still going to be a good offense. Matthew Golden breakout incoming. I like them to be able to put up some points, and I think defensively they're going to give up some points as well. UTSA returns Frank Harris, who is a magnificent dual threat quarterback that's actually been at UTSA for 7 years. You heard that right, 7 years. The first 2 seasons he had to sit out due to injury, but since taking over, he has been an absolute stud. He owns 34 different records, school records, mind you, at UTSA. 34. I did not make that number up. That is actually a real thing. He owns 34 records. Just a phenomenal player. Somebody who, can get it done in a myriad of ways. Now, he doesn't have Zachary Franklin. We know he transferred to Ole Miss, but he does have Josh Cephas. He does have DeCorian Clark. Great chemistry with both of those guys. They have a solid enough running game. They're going to score points, whether that's Harris punching it in or dialing up Cephas for 50 yards at a chunk plays. They're going to score a lot of points. It just seems like this total, which is set at 60, feels too low. I think both teams have a legitimate chance to be in the 40s. So I'm hitting that over 60 over on DraftKings, their primary sports book that I use. That is bet number 2. Bet number 3 is a prop. The anytime touchdown scores, we're not going to get a plus 450 on a play that we just feel so great about probably for a while. There's a lot of first touchdown score, but I'm not messing with that. I am going to hit you with the prop though here. Play number 3 in the final betting play is a receiving yardage prop. Go figure. Now, Ramel Keaton, you get a better number over on FanDuel. Somebody mentioned 45.5. That's a way better number, definitely. 47.5 on PrizePicks. But we get a little bit of plus money here. It's plus 120 earlier, 51.5 yards. So we're having to get 6-7 more yards, but to me, that's negligible, because if I think Keaton's going to break 45, he's going to break 51. I have him pegged for 75 plus at minimum. I would actually be truly shocked, obviously disappointed if he was under 100 yards. So I am hitting that over 51.5 receiving yards over on DraftKings. This is plus money. But if you have access to FanDuel, I know some people have access to one book and not the other, then hit that Ramel Keaton number on FanDuel if you can access it. All right. That wraps up the betting, the prize picks, the DFS. There are a ton of you out there. If this is the time for you, we're 4 minutes to lock. If you have any final questions that you want to ask, now is the time to get them in. The Colorado star Travis Hunter dealing with a bruised sternum. That just came across the Discord. I mean, not really going to affect too much DFS. I think that was something we talked about on the show. He's going to be doing a lot of things on the defensive side, special teams. I don't know that he's going to be relevant for DFS just because of all the other stuff that he's going to be doing. All right, Adam. I appreciate that, brother. We are tailing the two props like my life depends on it, like Adam's life depends on it, he says. I dig it, man. I'm like super superstitious. And I got all my rabbit. I don't have a rabbit foot, but my rabbit foot-esque lucky charm is going on. I've done my routine and I'm ready to rock and roll. All right, that'll wrap it up. I appreciate everybody who hung out with me this morning. Pre-lock Q&A show. Remember, there is an article dropping any moment within the next hour for the night slate. It will also break down the late night slate in Discord for you guys, playing college football all day, grinding, tilting, winning, and celebrating together. Next Thursday, we'll be back 9 p.m. PST, midnight EST for the slate breakdown show, CFB Super Show with my man Jake Kucheck. And then again, next Saturday morning, 8 a.m. PST, 11 a.m. EST, breaking it down, Q&A. Thanks, guys. Appreciate all the continued support. The show is doing record numbers so far, and that's because of you guys. Thanks very much. Next week, we're going to start doing giveaways, so make sure you tune in. Next episode of the CVFB Super Show. See you guys.